So it's week 15 in the NFL, and the Indianapolis Colts officially have a top 10 pick there, sitting at number 7. And they are going to Minnesota to play a 10-3 number 2 seed in the NFC football team. The Minnesota Vikings have played games very interestingly. They have found ways to close games in bizarre ways. What I'm saying is this Minnesota Vikings team is vulnerable. Now, is it a type of vulnerability that the Colts can take advantage of? Probably not. But in the past, if the Colts were like last year, the year before, I'd say they beat the Vikings, no matter what the record is. So, the Minnesota Vikings, they just haven't finished games, man. Okay, they have. But if you look at their points for and points against, 313 points scored against them, right? And they have scored 312 points. Negative 1 point differential, and they are 10-3. Yeah, that is insane. Insane. A lot of football teams will make it to maybe 5-1, 5-2, maybe 6 wins, and then things start going downhill. Especially if you're only winning games by like a possession. 8 out of 9 of the games that they've won by 8 points or less. The only game that they've won by 2 possessions was when they played the Green Bay Packers in Week 1. That was it. So, I'm not saying the Colts are going to beat the Vikings. I have never been a believer that the Vikings are one of the better teams in the NFL. They are a very, very good football team. They're 10-3, right? And, there's only so far you could go and say, the record doesn't matter. It does to a certain degree because they have forced turnovers late in the fourth quarter. But the offense and, this team in general has made mistakes. So the Colts have an opportunity because, if you go and look at the defenses, the Vikings, the Vikings defense in general and in allowing yards has not been good. 403.7 yards per game allowed. That's 32nd. That's the last in the NFL. Last 3, they allowed 453 yards. Yeah, that is not ideal. And, you have Jonathan Taylor coming to town. You have Matt Ryan. I mean, at this point, I don't care what defense that the Colts play against. They're not going to put up points. They're not going to put up a fun offensive performance. It's just not going to happen. So let's go through some of the metrics here, and let's talk about them a little bit. So the scoring offenses, right? The Vikings are 10th with 24 points scored per game. 27.3 in the last 3 against the Patriots, the Lions, and the Jets. The Colts, 29th with 16.1 points per game. 17.3 in the last 3. They played the Eagles, the Cowboys, and the Steelers. So it's quite obvious that the Vikings, it's not really a question that the Vikings have a phenomenal offense, and it is much miles ahead of the Colts offense. The Colts offense is just horrible. The fumbles, the Vikings have a +8 turnover differential. The Colts have a negative 14 point differential. Now, as I've said before, the Vikings are pretty good at finding bizarre ways to win the fourth quarter. And the Colts have found some pretty bizarre ways to lose in the fourth quarter. So, just taking that, it's a game for the Colts to lose. It just matches up perfectly. So, the rushing offenses. The Vikings are 27th with 95.6 rush yards per game. This was kind of crazy when I looked at it because I thought this Vikings offense line was better. It's a better unit than what it has been in recent years. But I expected them to have more rush yards than this. Dalvin Cook has just not been the guy this year, I guess. He's just not been that great. He just struggled. The Colts are 26th with 100.2 rush yards per game. Passing yards per game. The Vikings are 8th with 246.4 yards per game. The Colts or 19 with 217 passing yards per game. It's quite obvious that the Colts passing offense is horrible. They can sometimes get together some good drives, some decent passing yards, but that's about it. Once they get to the other side of the 50, once again to the 20, yeah, that's when even more problems sprout, and there's enough problems to begin with when you're not in those scenarios. So, it's just, this Colts offense is just horrible to watch. It's horrid. No one wants to watch it. No one wants to watch this team besides defense. If you like defense, the Colts have a very good defense. Speaking of defense, we already talked about the total yards allowed per game. So the opponent third down conversion percentage. The Colts are 37.06 conversion percentage on third down. Or no, the opponent third down conversion. The Colts allowed a 37.06 third down conversion percentage. 48% over the last 3 games. They're 8th overall in that regard. The Vikings have allowed a 39% third down conversion rate. 31%, almost 32 in the last 3 games. That's good for 15th overall. So, going back to the Colts total yards allowed per game. We talked about the Vikings. How that defense has been horrible. 403 yards allowed per game. That is good for the worst defense in the NFL in terms of yards allowed. They have been horrible. They're last, 32nd in the National Football League. So maybe the Colts can, if there's a game where they get stuff going, where they can get some kind of offensive rhythm, it's this one. And then if the defense could play strong, like they have been, against very good offenses, and you look at the Cowboys game, you see 54 points. That's not the defense's fault. No way. So the Colts are 8th in the league in total yards allowed per opponent per game. They've allowed 314.8 yards per game. Good for 8th. Last 340. So the Colts are going to have to be able to get the opponents down. They're going to have to be able to stop Justin Jefferson and the Vikings offense on third down. Otherwise, this defense is going to get worn out. We're going to see what happened versus the Cowboys. I don't think it's going to be like that because the Cowboys or the Vikings just can't run the ball like the Cowboys could. So this can be a much closer game than people may think. You look at some of the metrics. You look into some stuff. This game could be closer than you think. But if you look at the scenarios that these teams have been in throughout the season, the Colts have found ways to lose in bizarre ways. The Vikings have found ways to win in bizarre ways. That is why I am ultimately taking the Minnesota Vikings in Week 15 versus the Indianapolis Colts. Now, for majority of the season, basically for all the season, I've looked at this game and I've been like, this is a winnable game. Just because, the way the Vikings have been winning, they can beat anyone, but they can lose anyone. But, just for the scenario that I just described, I'm having the Minnesota Vikings take it. I say the Vikings win 27-23. Yeah, the Colts go over 20 for maybe the 4th or 5th time. Yeah, that's pretty sad. It doesn't matter what defense we play. It doesn't matter. The defense struggles, or the offense struggles. Any defense that the Indianapolis Colts offense plays, they look like a top 5 defense. That's how horrible the Colts offense is. Then you look at the Colts defense, on the other hand, they've been phenomenal. I feel so bad for that unit. They have played their hearts out 60 minutes a game. Every Sunday, every week. The offense has not been able to respond or do the same. So that is my prediction for the Indianapolis Colts versus the Minnesota Vikings in Week 15. Do the Colts move up in the draft order again? Do they move up? Will they have a top 5 pick at the end of the year? That is all I got for you guys today. Thank you for tuning in to the JDW Sports Talk Show. If you enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe, put the post notification bell on to miss any future videos. This is JDW Sports Talk Show. Signing off.